In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient civilizations have carved their empires from the bones of dead worlds, there exists a truth that even the most powerful beings dare not speak aloud. It is not technology that makes a species truly dangerous. It is not raw strength or superior intellect. It is something far more terrifying, the willingness to stand when everything else falls, to fight when victory seems impossible, and to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Galactic Council thought they knew about humans. They had read the reports, analyzed the data, and concluded that these young Terrans were nothing more than an amusing curiosity, a species barely out of their planetary cradle, stumbling through space with their primitive vessels and crude understanding of the universe's true nature. They were wrong. What they didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It was something that had been forged in the deepest caves of their homeworld, tested in the blood-soaked battlefields of their history, and perfected in the moment when they first looked up at the stars and decided they belonged there too. The galaxy's deadliest hunter understood this truth, and when he saw something familiar in the eyes of a young human who refused to bow, refused to break, and refused to surrender, he spoke a word that would shake the very foundations of interstellar civilization. Brother, this is the story of Marcus Chen, a maintenance worker who became a legend, and the day the galaxy learned why you should never underestimate a human who has nothing left to lose. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a worn cloth as he emerged from the maintenance shaft beneath the grand assembly hall of the Galactic Council station. The massive structure stretched out before him like a metallic cathedral, its crystalline walls pulsing with the soft blue light of alien technology. He had been working on the atmospheric recycling systems for the past 6 hours, ensuring that the various species attending today's session could breathe their preferred mixtures of gases without killing each other. At 24 standard years old, Marcus represented the third generation of humans to work on Council Station Nexus Prime. His grandmother had been among the first Terrans to set foot on the station when humanity was granted provisional membership status 15 years ago. His father had continued the tradition, working as a structural engineer until his death in an industrial accident 3 years prior. Now Marcus carried on the family legacy, though his role was far more humble than he had once dreamed. The assembly hall buzzed with activity as delegates from across the galaxy prepared for the day's proceedings. Marcus tried to keep his head down and make his way to the service corridors, but the familiar sound of mocking laughter stopped him in his tracks. A group of Keltharian diplomats stood near one of the massive support pillars, their serpentine bodies coiled in elegant curves as they conversed in their musical language. Their scales shimmered with an iridescent quality that spoke of their aquatic origins, and their large, dark eyes held an intelligence that was both ancient and coldly calculating. "Look at the little Terran," one of them said, switching to Standard Galactic as Marcus approached. "Still crawling through the maintenance tunnels like the primitive mammal his species evolved from." The lead Keltharian, Ambassador Sithai's Keth Maller, turned his attention to Marcus with the kind of predatory focus that made humans instinctively reach for weapons they no longer carried. "Tell me, young human, do you ever wonder what it might be like to actually contribute something meaningful to galactic civilization? Or are you content to spend your brief lifespan ensuring our waste disposal systems function properly?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he forced himself to remain calm. Confrontation with a council member would mean immediate termination and possible deportation back to Earth. His family had sacrificed too much for him to throw it all away on wounded pride. "I'm just doing my job, Ambassador. If you'll excuse me, I have other systems to check." "Oh, but you misunderstand," Sithais continued, his voice carrying the melodic cadence that made even insults sound like poetry. "I'm genuinely curious about the human perspective on your species' place in our grand civilization. You see, we've been reviewing Earth's application for full council membership, and the debate has been quite spirited." The other Keltharians produced sounds that might have been laughter if they had come from human throats. Marcus knew he should walk away, but something in the ambassador's tone suggested this was more than casual mockery. "What kind of debate?" "Well, the question before the council is whether humanity possesses the necessary qualities to be trusted with full membership privileges. Access to advanced technology, voting rights on galactic policy, trade agreements that extend beyond your single star system." Sithais moved closer, and Marcus caught a whiff of the chemical suppressants the Keltharian used to prevent his natural pheromones from triggering panic responses in other species. The problem is that your species has contributed so very little to our understanding of the universe. You have no unique technology to offer, no scientific breakthroughs that weren't achieved by other species millennia ago, and no cultural insights that haven't already been explored by civilizations that were building starships when your ancestors were still discovering fire. Marcus clenched his fists but kept his voice level. Humanity has only been part of the galactic community for 15 years. We're still learning. 15 years, Sithais repeated, as if tasting the words. Do you know what the Keltharian Empire accomplished in our first 15 years of galactic contact? We revolutionized faster-than-light communication, developed new forms of sustainable energy that are still used across 3 sectors, and successfully mediated a war between 2 species that had been fighting for over 1,000 years. The ambassador's head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. What has humanity achieved beyond sending maintenance workers to clean up after their betters? The words hit Marcus like physical blows, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk. Perhaps the young one's people have simply not had the opportunity to demonstrate their true nature. Every being in the immediate area fell silent. Marcus turned to see a figure approaching from the shadows near the assembly hall's main entrance, and his breath caught in his throat. The newcomer stood nearly 7 feet tall, his humanoid frame draped in a flowing coat that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His skin was pale as moonlight, marked with intricate tattoos that moved and shifted like living things. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, ancient, predatory, and filled with an intelligence that seemed to see through the facades that other beings wore like armor. Vash Kithrin, Sithais said, and there was something in his voice that Marcus had never heard before when the Keltharian addressed any other being. Respect. Fear. I was not aware that the Hunters Guild had sent a representative to today's session. Vash Kithrin. Marcus knew that name from the stories that circulated in the station's lower levels, whispered tales that the other workers claimed were legends, but that the veterans insisted were absolute truth. Vash was said to be the last of the Draconic Empire, a species that had dominated the galaxy's dark corners for over 2,000 years before mysteriously disappearing. He was a hunter, tracker, and assassin whose reputation was spoken of in hushed tones, even by the Council's most powerful members. Some said he had personally hunted and killed 3 different species into extinction. Others claimed he was responsible for ending the Meridian War by infiltrating the enemy's flagship and eliminating their entire command structure single-handedly. All the stories agreed on one thing. Vash Kithrin was the most dangerous being in known space. I am here as an observer, Vash said, his voice carrying an accent that suggested languages far older than standard galactic. But I find myself curious about your assessment of the humans, Ambassador Sithais. You speak of contributions to galactic civilization as if they were measured only in technology and scientific achievement. Sithais's scales rippled with nervous energy. Surely the Hunters Guild recognizes the importance of tangible progress. The galaxy operates on principles of merit and demonstrated capability. Indeed, Vash moved closer to the group, and Marcus noticed that the ancient being's footsteps made no sound on the station's metal deck plates. Tell me, young human, what is your name? Marcus Chen, he replied, surprised by how steady his voice sounded despite the tension that filled the air around them. Marcus Chen, Vash repeated, as if testing the weight of each syllable. And what do you do when you are not maintaining atmospheric systems? The question caught Marcus off guard. No one had ever asked him about his life outside of work, and certainly not a being whose reputation suggested he could kill Marcus before the human's nervous system could register the attack. I study mostly. Galactic history, xenobiology, cultural anthropology. I've been trying to understand how different species have adapted to space travel and interstellar cooperation. Interesting, Vash's tattoos seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. And what have you learned? Marcus glanced at the Keltharian delegation, who were watching the exchange with expressions that ranged from confusion to barely concealed hostility. That every species brings something unique to the galaxy. The Keltharians contributed their mastery of aquatic engineering and bioadaptive technology. The Zorathi shared their understanding of quantum mathematics. The Meridians developed the first stable wormhole generators before they. He stopped himself before mentioning the war that Vash had allegedly ended. Before they attempted to use those generators as weapons of mass destruction, Vash finished quietly. Yes, I remember that contribution quite well. Sithais interjected with what might have been diplomatic smoothness if not for the slight tremor in his voice. Surely you understand, honored Vash, that the Council must make decisions based on practical considerations. Humanity has shown enthusiasm for learning, but enthusiasm alone does not qualify a species for full membership privileges. Practical considerations, Vash mused. He turned his attention back to Marcus, and those ancient eyes seemed to look directly through him. Tell me, Marcus Chen, what would you do if this station were attacked right now? If hostile forces breached the hull and began killing the delegates you work so hard to keep alive? The question was so unexpected that Marcus almost laughed. I'm a maintenance worker. I don't have combat training or weapons clearance. I'd probably follow emergency protocols and try to get to the evacuation pods. Would you? Vash's voice carried a tone that suggested he found Marcus's answer deeply interesting. Even if it meant abandoning beings who might die without your help. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a warmth that spread outward like the first spark of a fire. No, he said, and he realized he meant it with every fiber of his being. No, I wouldn't abandon them. I'd do whatever I could to help, even if it meant. The lights went out. Emergency illumination flickered to life a moment later, bathing the assembly hall in an eerie red glow. Alarms began wailing throughout the station, and the voice of the automated emergency system echoed through the corridors in 17 different languages. Hull breach detected. All personnel proceed to designated evacuation zones. This is not a drill. In the chaos that followed, as delegates screamed and ran for the exits, Marcus saw Vash Kithrin smile for the first time. It was a predator's smile, full of sharp teeth and genuine pleasure. How fascinating, the ancient hunter said as explosions rocked the station's superstructure. It seems we are about to discover what the human contribution to galactic civilization truly looks like. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows that lined the assembly hall, Marcus could see ships emerging from hyperspace. They were sleek, black vessels with angular designs that seemed to absorb the light from nearby stars. As he watched in growing horror, the attacking ships began launching some kind of projectiles that burned through the station's defensive shields like acid through paper. The Reaper fleet had found them. Marcus had read about the Reapers in his historical studies, though most official records classified them as a terrorist organization rather than acknowledging them for what they truly were. The surviving remnants of a dozen species that had been conquered, enslaved, or exterminated by the expanding galactic civilization. They struck from the dark spaces between stars, using stolen and improvised technology to wage a war of revenge against any target they could reach. They took no prisoners, honored no treaties, and showed no mercy to anyone who represented the galactic order that had destroyed their worlds. The evacuation pods won't work, Marcus said, his mind racing through the station's layout and emergency systems. The Reapers will target them as soon as they launch, and the defensive systems won't hold for more than 10 minutes against that kind of focused assault. Sithais and his delegation were clustered near the main exit, their earlier arrogance replaced by the kind of primal terror that transcended species boundaries. How could you possibly know that? The ambassador demanded. Because I know this station better than anyone, Marcus replied, already moving toward the maintenance access panel near the support pillar. I've crawled through every maintenance shaft, checked every system relay, and studied every emergency protocol. The Reapers have done their homework. They know exactly where to hit us to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. His fingers flew over the control interface, accessing the station's internal monitoring systems. What he saw made his blood run cold. The attackers weren't just randomly firing on the station. They were targeting specific locations with surgical precision. Life support hubs, communication arrays, power distribution nodes, and defensive weapon emplacements were all being systematically destroyed. But there was something else, a pattern in their attack that suggested they had detailed intelligence about the station's layout. They're not just trying to destroy the station, Marcus said, more to himself than to the others. They're trying to disable it without breaching certain sections. They want to board us. Vash moved to stand beside him at the control panel, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and old steel. Explain. Look at the targeting pattern, Marcus said, calling up a holographic display of the station's structure. Red indicators showed the locations of successful hits, while blue markers indicated areas that remained untouched. They're avoiding anything that would cause catastrophic decompression in the residential and diplomatic quarters. They want to take prisoners, probably to use as leverage in negotiations or to extract information about council operations. The ancient hunter studied the display with the intensity of a scholar examining an ancient text. Impressive. Your species may lack advanced technology, but your pattern recognition capabilities are quite remarkable. Another series of explosions rocked the station, and Marcus could hear the distinctive sound of hull plating being sheared away by directed energy weapons. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the Reapers completed their assault and began boarding operations. "We need to get everyone to the secure sections in the lower levels," Marcus said, his mind already mapping out the safest routes through the station's maze of corridors and maintenance tunnels. "The residential quarters have independent life support and thicker armor plating. We can hold out there until the council fleet arrives." "The council fleet is 3 hours away," Sci-Fi said, his voice hollow with despair. "The Reapers chose their timing well." Marcus felt that warmth in his chest grow stronger. "Then we hold for 3 hours." He turned to address the crowd of delegates and staff members who had gathered around the control station, their faces reflecting a dozen different forms of fear, but all united in their need for someone to tell them what to do. Marcus had never been responsible for anything more complex than an atmospheric recycling system. But as he looked out at these beings who represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, he realized that none of their advanced technology or ancient wisdom had prepared them for this moment. "Listen to me," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall despite the chaos around them. "I know this station. I know every corridor, every maintenance shaft, and every emergency system. I can get you to safety, but I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly." Vash Kithrin was watching him with those predatory eyes, and Marcus thought he saw something like approval in their ancient depths. "What do you need us to do, Marcus Chen?" The fact that the galaxy's most feared hunter was asking for his instructions should have been terrifying. Instead, Marcus felt a calm settle over him like armor. "We're going to split into groups and use the maintenance tunnels to reach the secure levels. The passages are too narrow for their combat suits, and they won't have detailed maps of the service areas. We'll be invisible." He began assigning groups and routes, drawing on his intimate knowledge of the station's layout to plan paths that would avoid the main corridors where Reaper boarding parties would likely concentrate their initial assault. As he spoke, Marcus noticed that the other beings had stopped looking at him like a primitive maintenance worker. They were listening to him with the kind of attention usually reserved for senior military officers or veteran diplomats. "What about the others?" asked Dr. Thana Mordith, a Zorathi xenobiologist whose research Marcus had read extensively. "There are over 2,000 beings on this station." Marcus called up another display, this one showing the station's current population distribution. "The automated systems have already begun routing people to emergency shelters, but they're using standard evacuation protocols. The Reapers will expect that. We need to get word to the shelter coordinators and have them redirect people to alternate safe zones." "The communication systems have been damaged," Sithis pointed out. "The primary systems, yes, but the maintenance network uses a separate communication array for coordinating repair teams. It's buried deep in the station's superstructure where the Reapers wouldn't think to target it." Marcus was already moving toward a secondary control panel, his fingers dancing across interfaces he had helped install and maintain. "I can patch into that network and send instructions to the emergency coordinators." As he worked, Marcus became aware that Vash had moved closer, close enough that the ancient being's presence seemed to fill the space around them with an almost electrical tension. "You are not what I expected, young human." "What did you expect?" Marcus asked without looking up from his work. "Fear, panic, the kind of primal terror that overwhelms rational thought when faced with imminent death." Vash's voice carried a note of what might have been admiration. "Instead, you analyze the situation, identify solutions, and take command of beings who possess centuries more experience than you do. This is not the behavior of a primitive species." Marcus managed to establish contact with 3 of the 5 emergency coordination centers, and he quickly began transmitting new evacuation routes and safe zone designations. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about the early space colonies," he said as he worked. How the colonists had to adapt to situations they'd never trained for, using whatever tools and knowledge they had available. He said the key to survival wasn't having the best equipment or the most experience. It was being willing to think differently when the normal solutions stopped working. The station shuddered as another series of explosions tore through the outer hull. Through the assembly hall's windows, Marcus could see the first Reaper boarding pods beginning their approach. The small, heavily armored craft moved like insects, using magnetic clamps and plasma cutters to attach themselves to the station's hull before burning their way through. "Time to go," Marcus said, closing down the control systems and grabbing a portable toolkit from his maintenance kit. "Everyone stay close and follow my lead. We're going to take the service tunnel that runs behind the primary life support manifold. It's a tight squeeze, but it will put us 3 levels down without having to use any of the main corridors." As they made their way toward the hidden entrance to the maintenance network, Marcus caught sight of something that made his heart skip. Through one of the smaller observation windows, he could see a Reaper boarding pod that had successfully attached to the station's hull not 50 meters from their current position. The pod's cutting beam was already beginning to carve through the outer armor, and Marcus estimated they had perhaps 2 minutes before the attackers broke through. He was about to warn the group when Vash suddenly grabbed his arm. The ancient hunter's grip was gentle but completely immovable, and his eyes were focused on something beyond the window that Marcus couldn't see. "Interesting," Vash murmured. "It seems the Reapers have brought their new toys to play." Marcus followed the hunter's gaze and felt his blood turn to ice. Emerging from the boarding pod was a figure in massive power armor, but it wasn't the armor that terrified him. It was what was inside it. Through the helmet's transparent faceplate, Marcus could see something that had once been sentient, but was now something else entirely. The creature's eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and cables and mechanical augmentations had been grafted directly into its skull and nervous system. "Combat drones," Vash explained in a tone that suggested he had encountered such things before. "The Reapers have been experimenting with forcible cybernetic enhancement of captured prisoners. They strip away everything that made the original being an individual and replace it with combat programming and artificial reflexes. The result is a warrior that feels no pain, knows no fear, and follows orders with absolute precision." The combat drone finished cutting through the hull and stepped into the station's corridor. It was followed by 3 more identical figures, their movements synchronized with mechanical perfection. Marcus watched in horror as they began methodically checking each room and access point, their sensors sweeping for any sign of life. "We need to move now," Marcus said, his voice tight with urgency. But as he turned toward the maintenance access, he saw that several members of their group had frozen in terror at the sight of the combat drones. Dr. Mordeth was shaking so badly she could barely stand, while 2 of the Keltharian diplomats had curled into defensive coils that their species adopted when faced with mortal danger. "They're too scared to move," Marcus realized, "and we can't carry them through the maintenance tunnels." Vash was studying the combat drones with professional interest. 4 enhanced soldiers with military-grade equipment and tactical coordination. They will systematically search this entire level within 10 minutes. "Can you stop them?" Marcus asked. The ancient hunter's smile returned, sharper than before. "I could eliminate all 4 without significant difficulty, but doing so would alert the other boarding parties to our presence and bring additional forces to this location." Marcus felt time running out like water through his fingers. The maintenance tunnel would lead them to safety, but not if half their group was too terrified to follow. The combat drones were getting closer with each passing second, their methodical search pattern bringing them inexorably toward the assembly hall. And somewhere else on the station, 2,000 other beings were facing the same impossible choice between hiding and helping others escape. "There has to be another way," Marcus said, more to himself than to anyone else. "There is," Vash said quietly, "but it would require someone to delay the drones long enough for the others to reach the tunnels. Someone would have to stay behind." Marcus looked at the group of terrified delegates, then at the maintenance access that represented their only hope of survival. He thought about his grandmother, who had helped design the first human habitats on council stations. He thought about his father, who had died in an accident while ensuring that the structural integrity of this very station remained sound. And he thought about every human who had ever looked up at the stars and decided that the universe was big enough for them too. "I'll do it," Marcus said. The words came out of his mouth before he had consciously decided to speak them, But as soon as he heard them, he knew they were true. He would stay behind. He would buy time for the others to escape. And if that meant facing 4 combat drones with nothing but a maintenance toolkit and whatever courage he could muster, then that's what he would do. Vash Kithrin turned to look at him with those ancient predators' eyes, and for a long moment, the two of them simply regarded each other in silence. Then, slowly, the legendary hunter nodded his head in what might have been a gesture of respect. "That," Vash said softly, "is exactly what I hoped you would say." What happened next would be remembered and retold throughout the galaxy for generations to come, though the exact details would often be dismissed as exaggeration by those who had not witnessed it firsthand. Vash Kithrin reached into his flowing coat and withdrew something that made the air around them seem to vibrate with barely contained energy. It was a weapon, though calling it such seemed inadequate. The device appeared to be made of some dark metal that absorbed light, its surface covered with the same shifting tattoos that marked the hunter's skin. When Vash activated it with a thought, the weapon unfolded like a living thing, extending into a staff nearly 6 feet long with crystalline blades emerging from both ends. "You will not face them alone, Marcus Chen," Vash said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions beyond normal sound. "If you are willing to sacrifice yourself for beings you barely know, then you have earned something that very few in this galaxy can claim." "What's that?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "My respect." Vash's tattoos pulsed with a brighter light, and Marcus could feel power emanating from the ancient being like heat from a forge. "And in my culture, respect creates obligation. I cannot allow a warrior to die with honor while I hide in the shadows." Marcus shook his head, confused by the sudden turn of events. "I'm not a warrior. I fix atmospheric processors and waste recycling systems." "You are about to face 4 enhanced combat drones with improvised weapons in order to protect innocent beings," Vash replied. "If that does not make you a warrior, then the word has lost all meaning." The sound of plasma cutters grew louder as the combat drones continued their systematic search of the level. Marcus could see their armored forms through the assembly hall's interior windows, moving with mechanical precision as they cleared each room. They would reach the assembly hall within minutes. "Listen to me carefully," Vash said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher instructing a promising student. "Combat is not about strength or superior equipment. It is about understanding your environment, exploiting your enemy's weaknesses, and using every advantage available to you. You know this station better than any being alive. That knowledge is a weapon more powerful than any tool I carry." Marcus felt that warmth in his chest growing stronger, spreading through his limbs like liquid fire. "What do you need me to do?" "Show me how this place works. Show me the patterns and systems that these invaders do not understand. And when the time comes, trust your instincts." Vash moved toward the maintenance access panel that Marcus had been working at earlier. "The combat drones are programmed to respond to direct threats with overwhelming force, but they are not designed to adapt to environmental hazards or system failures that appear to be accidental." Understanding began to dawn in Marcus's mind. "You want to use the station's systems against them." "I want you to use the station's systems against them," Vash corrected. "This is your domain, young human. I am merely here to ensure that you survive long enough to demonstrate what your species is truly capable of." Marcus felt a surge of something he had never experienced before, a combination of terror and excitement that made every nerve in his body sing with electric potential. He moved to the environmental control station and began calling up system diagrams that he knew by heart. "The atmospheric processors for this level are controlled from here. I can adjust the gas mixture, increase or decrease pressure, even introduce trace elements that might interfere with their sensors." "Excellent, what else?" Marcus's fingers flew over the controls as his mind raced through the possibilities. "The gravity generators are on an independent network. I can create localized variations that might throw off their balance. And the lighting systems are tied into the power distribution grid. I can create strobing effects or complete blackouts in specific areas." "Now you begin to understand," Vash said, and there was something like pride in his voice. "Your enemies are enhanced soldiers, but they are still dependent on their equipment and their programming. Disrupt their environment and you disrupt their advantage." The first combat drone appeared at the assembly hall's main entrance. Marcus caught a glimpse of it through the transparent aluminum doors, a towering figure in gunmetal gray armor, its helmet sweeping back and forth as built-in sensors analyzed the vast space beyond. The drone's weapons were unlike anything Marcus had seen in the technical manuals. Sleek energy rifles that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, connected to the armor's power systems by organic-looking cables. "Now," Vash whispered. Marcus activated his prepared sequence. The lighting in the assembly hall immediately shifted to a deep red emergency mode, while the atmospheric processors began introducing a harmless but dense particulate that would interfere with optical sensors. At the same time, he adjusted the local gravity to 90% of standard, just enough to throw off the timing of any being accustomed to normal gravitational conditions. The combat drone stepped through the doors and immediately raised its weapon, scanning for targets. But instead of the clear sightlines and predictable environment it had been programmed to expect, the drone found itself in a space where shadows danced at the edge of perception, and the air itself seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Vash moved like liquid darkness. One moment he was standing beside Marcus at the control station, and the next he was behind the combat drone, his crystalline-bladed staff cutting through the air in an arc that would have severed the drone's head from its shoulders if the blow had connected. But the enhanced soldier's reflexes were faster than human normal, and it spun at the last second, bringing its energy rifle up to block the attack. The clash between weapon and staff sent sparks flying through the particulate-laden air, creating a light show that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But Marcus barely noticed the display because his attention was focused on what the combat readouts were telling him about the drone's capabilities. The creature inside the armor was strong, fast, and utterly without fear. But it was also operating according to predetermined parameters that assumed a static environment. "Adjusting atmospheric pressure," Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly despite the noise of combat. He increased the air pressure by 15%, enough to affect the drone's balance without causing immediate harm to any unprotected beings in the area. The change was subtle, but it was enough. The combat drone's next shot went wide by several inches, the energy blast scoring a line across the assembly hall's far wall instead of striking Vash center mass. The ancient hunter used the opening to dart forward, his staff spinning in complex patterns that created a web of crystalline light around the drone's position. But Marcus could see more enemies approaching through the corridor beyond the main entrance. 3 more combat drones were moving toward their position, drawn by the sound of conflict. In less than a minute, they would be facing 4 enhanced soldiers in an open space with limited cover. "We need to move this fight," Marcus said, his mind racing through the station's layout. "The maintenance bay on level 7 has a more complex environment, multiple levels, heavy equipment, and independent system controls." Vash parried another energy blast with his staff, the crystalline blades somehow absorbing and redirecting the deadly energy. "Lead the way." Marcus quickly gathered the remaining delegates and led them toward the maintenance access tunnel he had identified earlier. The passage was narrow and would require them to crawl single file through several sections, but it would bring them directly to the Level 7 maintenance complex without exposing them to the main corridors where other Reaper forces might be operating. "Dr. Mordeth, I need you to take command of the group once you reach the maintenance bay," Marcus said as he helped the Zorathi scientist into the tunnel entrance. "There's an emergency communication station in Section C7. Use it to coordinate with the other evacuation groups and establish a secure perimeter." "What about you?" Dr. Mordeth asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Someone needs to delay the combat drones long enough for you to get clear," Marcus replied. "And someone needs to ensure that they follow us to the maintenance bay instead of pursuing the other evacuation groups." Ambassador Sithais had recovered enough of his composure to speak, though his scales were still rippling with nervous energy. "This is madness. You are a maintenance worker, not a soldier. Let the hunter handle the combat drones while we evacuate through the standard emergency routes." Marcus looked at the Keltharian diplomat and felt something shift inside him, like a lock turning in his mind. "The standard emergency routes are compromised. The Reapers have been planning this attack for months, possibly years. They know where we'll run, and they'll be waiting for us." He paused, meeting Sithais's large, dark eyes with a steady gaze. "But they don't know how a human thinks. They don't understand what we're willing to do when people we care about are in danger." "People you care about?" Sithais repeated, his voice carrying a note of genuine confusion. "You barely know any of us. We have shown you nothing but contempt and dismissal. Why would you risk your life for beings who consider you inferior?" The question hung in the air between them, and Marcus realized that he was being asked to articulate something that he had never consciously examined before. Why was he willing to sacrifice himself for these people? Why did their safety matter more to him than his own survival? Because that's what humans do, he said finally, and the words felt like truth resonating in his bones. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We stand up when everyone else sits down. We fight for others even when they wouldn't fight for us. He helped the last of the delegation into the tunnel entrance. It's not about whether you've been kind to me or whether you think I'm worthy of respect. It's about what's right. Vash had been listening to this exchange while maintaining his defensive position near the assembly hall entrance, his staff weaving patterns in the air that somehow deflected the energy blasts from the approaching combat drones. Now he turned toward Marcus with an expression that seemed to contain centuries of accumulated wisdom. "And that," the ancient hunter said, "is why your species will survive when others fall." The combat drones had reached the assembly hall entrance, and Marcus could see them through the swirling particulates he had introduced into the atmosphere. 4 identical figures in gray armor, their movements synchronized like components of a single machine. They were scanning the space methodically, their sensors cutting through his environmental countermeasures with terrifying efficiency. "Time to go," Marcus said, but instead of following the diplomatic group into the tunnel, he moved toward a different access panel located near the assembly hall's secondary exit. "I'm going to create a trail for them to follow, make sure they pursue us instead of searching for the evacuation groups." "How?" Vash asked, even as he began moving to follow Marcus toward their alternate route. Marcus's fingers danced over the control interface, accessing systems he had maintained and repaired countless times over the past 3 years. Every action on this station creates electronic signatures in the monitoring systems. I'm going to leave a pattern of system activations that will lead the drones directly to the maintenance bay. Environmental adjustments, power fluctuations, communication bursts, all the things that would happen if a group of frightened beings were trying to move through the station without being detected. He initiated the sequence he had programmed, a cascade of minor system changes that would propagate through the station's network like ripples in a pond. To the combat drone sensors, it would appear that their targets were using maintenance tunnels and service corridors to reach level 7, following a route that would bring them directly to the primary maintenance facility. "Impressive," Vash said as they began their own journey toward level 7 via a route that paralleled but did not intersect with the path Marcus had created for the drones. "You are thinking like a hunter now. Use misdirection to control your enemy's movements, then choose the ground where you will make your stand." They moved through the station's hidden passages with Marcus leading the way. The service corridors were familiar territory to him, spaces he had traversed thousands of times while performing routine maintenance tasks. But now these same passages felt different, transformed by necessity into the arteries of a complex strategy that he was creating moment by moment. "Tell me about the maintenance bay," Vash said as they descended toward level 7. "What advantages does it offer?" "Multiple levels connected by catwalks and service platforms," Marcus replied, calling up the facility's layout in his mind. "Heavy industrial equipment that can be used for cover or as improvised weapons. Independent power systems, atmospheric controls, and communication networks. And most importantly, it's a space I know better than anyone else in the galaxy." They reached level 7 and made their way toward the maintenance bay through a service tunnel that brought them to an observation platform overlooking the primary work area. The bay was enormous, stretching nearly the full width of the station's central section and rising through 3 deck levels. Massive atmospheric processors dominated the central space, their crystalline components humming with the energy required to maintain breathable atmosphere for thousands of different species. Catwalks and service platforms created a 3-dimensional maze throughout the facility, while tool stations and equipment lockers provided potential sources of improvised weapons or defensive positions. "The combat drones will enter through the main access portal," Marcus said, pointing to the large opening that connected the maintenance bay to the station's primary corridor system. "Their programming will direct them to secure the central area first, then systematically clear each level." "But that is not how you would approach this space," Vash observed. Marcus smiled grimly. "No, if I were trying to hunt someone in this bay, I'd use the maintenance shafts to reach the upper catwalks first, control the high ground, then work my way down level by level. But the combat drones won't think like that because they're programmed to follow military doctrine designed for standard combat environments. They made their way to Marcus's chosen position, a control station located on the highest catwalk that provided access to all of the bay's major systems. From here, Marcus could manipulate the atmospheric processors, adjust the lighting and gravity throughout the facility, and control the massive mechanical systems that kept the station's life support functioning. "What is your plan?" Vash asked as they settled into their defensive position. Marcus was already bringing the bay's systems online, his fingers moving over controls he had used countless times in routine maintenance operations. The combat drones are designed to operate as a coordinated unit. They share tactical information through their communication network and adapt their strategies based on real-time data analysis. He paused to activate a sequence that would cycle the atmospheric processors through a diagnostic routine, creating noise and visual distortion throughout the bay. But what happens if I can disrupt their coordination, force them to operate as individuals instead of components of a single system? Vash's tattoos pulsed with brighter light as understanding dawned in his ancient eyes. Electronic warfare. You are not just fighting the drones themselves, you are fighting their network. Exactly. Marcus called up the bay's communication systems and began implementing modifications he had only theoretical knowledge of until this moment. The station's internal network includes emergency protocols for isolating damaged sections from the main grid. If I can convince the system that the maintenance bay has suffered catastrophic damage, it will automatically establish communication barriers to prevent the spread of corrupted data. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the service corridors as the combat drones approached their position. Marcus could track their movement through the station's monitoring systems, watching as they followed the electronic trail he had created with mechanical precision. They would reach the maintenance bay within minutes. "They're coming," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. 4 enhanced soldiers with military-grade equipment and tactical coordination. "For now," Vash replied with that predator's smile. "But in a few minutes, they will be 4 confused individuals operating in an environment that no longer follows the rules they were programmed to understand." Marcus initiated the final phase of his preparation. The maintenance bay's lighting shifted to emergency amber, while the atmospheric processors began cycling through unusual patterns that created auditory interference throughout the facility. Most importantly, the communication isolation protocols engaged, creating a localized dead zone that would prevent the combat drones from sharing tactical data or coordinating their movements. "Now we see what humanity is truly made of," Vash said, raising his crystalline-bladed staff as the first combat drone appeared at the main access portal. The enhanced soldier stepped into the maintenance bay and immediately raised its weapon, scanning for targets among the maze of catwalks and industrial equipment. But instead of the clean, tactical environment it had been programmed to expect, the drone found itself in a space where the normal rules of electronic warfare no longer applied. Marcus activated the atmospheric processor's emergency venting sequence, creating powerful air currents that would interfere with projectile accuracy while simultaneously filling the bay with dense clouds of harmless, but visually obscuring vapor. At the same time, he began cycling the artificial gravity through random variations that would affect the balance and timing of anyone not intimately familiar with the facility's normal operating parameters. The second combat drone entered the bay and attempted to establish communication with its partner. When the connection failed, both enhanced soldiers began moving toward the central processing stations according to their programmed search patterns. But the environment Marcus had created was unlike anything in their tactical databases. "Their coordination is breaking down," Marcus observed, watching the drone's movements through the monitoring systems. "They're starting to operate independently, following individual search protocols instead of team tactics." Vash moved along the upper catwalk with predatory grace, using the visual cover Marcus had created to approach the nearest combat drone from an unexpected angle. "Then, it is time to demonstrate the difference between programmed responses and intuitive adaptation." What followed was a display of combat artistry that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. Vash Keithran moved through the maintenance bay like a force of nature, his crystalline-bladed staff cutting through the air in patterns that seemed to bend light itself. But more than his physical prowess, It was the ancient hunter's ability to read and adapt to the changing environment that made him truly dangerous. When the first combat drone fired at Vash's position, the hunter was no longer there. He had used Marcus's knowledge of the atmospheric processor's cycling patterns to predict exactly when a burst of vapor would obscure the drone's sensors, allowing him to move to a new position while his enemy fired at empty air. When the second drone attempted to reach the upper catwalks, it found its path blocked by a wall of superheated steam that Marcus had created by temporarily overloading one of the thermal exchange units. The enhanced soldier's armor could protect it from the heat, but the visual distortion was complete, forcing the drone to navigate by sensors that were being systematically jammed by the facility's modified communication protocols. "Your turn," Vash called out as he engaged the third combat drone in close combat on the facility's primary level. "Show me what a human can accomplish when their people are threatened." Marcus felt that warmth in his chest reach a crescendo as he fully embraced his role in the battle. This was no longer about simply surviving or buying time for others to escape. This was about demonstrating that humanity belonged in the galaxy not because they possessed superior technology or ancient wisdom, but because they possessed something far more valuable: the willingness to adapt, to sacrifice, and to stand against impossible odds when others needed protection. The fourth combat drone had reached the catwalk level and was systematically searching each platform for targets. Marcus could see it through the monitoring systems, its movements mechanical and predictable as it followed programmed search protocols. The enhanced soldier was perhaps 50 meters away and closing on Marcus's position with methodical precision. Marcus abandoned his control station and began moving through the catwalk system, using his intimate knowledge of the maintenance bay's layout to stay ahead of the pursuing drone. But instead of simply running, he began implementing a strategy that no military tactical manual would have included. He started sabotaging his own station. Using his maintenance toolkit, Marcus began systematically overloading power conduits and destabilizing atmospheric processors throughout the facility. To an outside observer, it would have looked like a desperate act of destruction. But Marcus was creating something far more sophisticated, a cascade failure that would transform the entire maintenance bay into a weapon. The atmospheric processors began venting gases in unpredictable patterns, creating pressure waves that reverberated through the facility's superstructure. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly as Marcus overloaded the generators beyond their safety parameters. And throughout it all, the modified communication protocols prevented the combat drones from coordinating their responses or calling for reinforcements. "Remarkable," Vash said as he dispatched the second combat drone with a precisely placed strike that severed the connections between the enhanced soldier's cybernetic implants and its armor systems. "You are not just fighting in this environment, you are reshaping it to serve your purposes." The third drone fell to a combination of Vash's crystalline blades and a localized gravity inversion that Marcus triggered at the exact moment the ancient hunter initiated his attack. The enhanced soldier's programming had no protocols for dealing with opponents who could literally change the fundamental forces operating in their combat environment. That left the fourth drone, which had finally tracked Marcus to his position on the upper catwalk system. The enhanced soldier raised its energy weapon and fired, but Marcus was already moving, swinging from catwalk to catwalk using maintenance cables with the kind of three-dimensional mobility that came from years of working in zero-gravity environments. "Come on," Marcus called out to the pursuing drone, leading it deeper into the catwalk maze. "Let me show you something about humans that your programmers didn't include in your database." He led the combat drone to the facility's primary atmospheric processor, a massive crystalline structure that rose from the facility's floor to its ceiling like a technological tree. The processor was the heart of the maintenance bay's life support system, and Marcus knew every component, every safety protocol, and every potential failure mode. The combat drone followed him onto the narrow maintenance platform that surrounded the processor's upper levels, its energy weapon trained on Marcus with mechanical precision. At this range, there was no cover and no possibility of evasion. The enhanced soldier had Marcus trapped, and both of them knew it. "You cannot escape," the drone said, its voice a synthesized monotone that carried no trace of the individual consciousness that had once inhabited the armor. "Surrender, and your termination will be efficient." Marcus looked into the drone's glowing optical sensors and smiled. I'm not trying to escape. I'm trying to teach you something about the difference between following orders and making choices. He triggered the atmospheric processor's emergency shutdown sequence. The massive crystalline structure began powering down, its harmonic resonance shifting from the steady hum that had provided background noise throughout their battle to a discordant wail that seemed to shake the station's superstructure. But Marcus wasn't shutting down the processor to disable it. He was preparing to overload it in a way that would create a localized electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to disrupt every electronic system in the immediate area, including the combat drone's cybernetic enhancements. Warning, the drone's synthesized voice announced as its sensors detected the energy buildup. Electromagnetic anomaly detected, initiating emergency protocols. But it was too late. Marcus had timed his sabotage perfectly, using his knowledge of the processor's systems to create an overload that would peak at the exact moment when the combat drone's programming would direct it to fire its energy weapon. The electromagnetic pulse erupted from the crystalline structure like a wave of invisible force, washing over everything in the maintenance bay with energies that normal electronics were never designed to handle. The combat drone's weapon powered down mid-shot, its energy blast dissipating harmlessly into the bay's atmosphere. The enhanced soldier's armor systems flickered and failed, leaving the consciousness trapped inside suddenly cut off from the cybernetic implants that had controlled its every thought and action. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Marcus found himself looking into the optical sensors of a being that was no longer a drone, but was not yet free. The consciousness inside the armor was struggling to remember what it had been before the Reaper's forcible enhancement, fighting against months or years of programmed conditioning that had stripped away everything that made it an individual. Please, the being said, and its voice was no longer synthesized but raw and desperate with genuine emotion. I remember having a name. I remember choosing things for myself. What did they do to me? Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he realized the full horror of what the Reapers had created. These weren't just weapons. They were prisoners, beings who had been captured and subjected to technological torture that stripped away their free will while leaving their consciousness trapped inside bodies they could no longer control. Your name, Marcus said gently, moving closer to the disabled combat drone. Do you remember your name? Kellith, the being whispered, and the words seemed to carry the weight of rediscovered identity. My name is Kellith Morden. I was a navigator on a merchant vessel. The Reapers took us 6 months ago. They said they were going to make us strong. Marcus helped Kellith remove the disabled helmet, revealing a face that was definitely humanoid, but marked with the distinctive features of one of the smaller galactic species. The navigator's eyes were filled with a mixture of gratitude and horror as the full scope of what had been done to him became clear. We have to help the others, Kellith said, his voice growing stronger as more memories returned. There are hundreds of us, maybe thousands, all converted into combat drones, all forced to fight against innocent beings while our real selves screamed inside our own minds. From somewhere else in the maintenance bay came the sound of approaching footsteps, not the mechanical precision of combat drones, but the irregular pattern of beings moving under their own free will. Vash appeared on the catwalk, his crystalline-bladed staff now retracted into its dormant form. The electromagnetic pulse disabled the other 3 drones as well, the ancient hunter reported. Their original personalities are beginning to reassert themselves, though they will need time to fully recover from their conditioning. Marcus looked around at the devastated maintenance bay, his mind already working on plans for helping the liberated prisoners and repairing the systems he had damaged. But more than that, he was thinking about the implications of what they had discovered. If the Reapers were forcibly converting captured prisoners into combat drones, then every enemy they faced was also a victim who deserved rescue rather than destruction. We need to get word to the Council fleet, Marcus said. They need to know that these aren't just enemy soldiers, they're hostages. Vash studied him with those ancient predator's eyes, and Marcus thought he saw something like profound respect in their depths. You have just defeated 4 enhanced combat soldiers using nothing but your knowledge of this station's systems and your willingness to sacrifice yourself for others. And your first concern is for the welfare of beings who were trying to kill you moments ago. The hunter's tattoos pulsed with a soft light. Your species continues to surprise me, Marcus Chen. As they helped Kelleth and the other liberated prisoners begin the process of removing their cybernetic constraints, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened since the Reaper attack began. He had started this day as a maintenance worker whose greatest responsibility was ensuring that atmospheric recycling systems functioned properly. Now he was helping to coordinate the defense of an entire space station while simultaneously discovering a method for freeing the Reaper's enslaved soldiers. "This isn't over," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "The Reapers came here for a reason, and it wasn't just to take prisoners. They're planning something bigger." Vash nodded grimly. "Indeed, but whatever their ultimate goal, they now face an opponent they did not account for in their calculations." "What do you mean?" The ancient hunter's smile returned, sharp and predatory, but somehow warm as well. "They came expecting to face the same galactic civilization they have been fighting for years, predictable, complacent, and constrained by conventional thinking. Instead, they have encountered something their intelligence networks never reported." Marcus waited for the explanation, though part of him already understood. "They have encountered humanity," Vash said. "And humanity, I am beginning to understand, does not fight the same wars that other species fight. You do not follow the same rules, accept the same limitations, or make the same assumptions about what is possible." The hunter's tattoos pulsed brighter as he looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "You fight with your hearts as much as your minds, and that makes you far more dangerous than any weapon in the galaxy." In the distance, alarms continued to wail as the Reaper attack continued. But Marcus no longer felt helpless or overwhelmed. He felt like he finally understood what his grandmother had meant when she told him that humans would find their place among the stars not by becoming like other species, but by being uniquely, unmistakably human. The real battle was just beginning. The Council fleet arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule, their massive dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace like falling stars against the backdrop of the void. But by the time their first boarding parties reached Nexus Prime, they found a situation that defied every tactical assessment they had prepared for. The Reaper attack had failed. More than failed, it had been completely reversed. Instead of a captured station filled with hostages, the Council forces discovered a facility where former Reaper combat drones were working alongside station personnel to repair damage and coordinate rescue operations. Instead of overwhelming enemy superiority, they found Reaper ships floating dead in space, their crews liberated from cybernetic conditioning and requesting asylum from the very civilization they had been programmed to destroy. At the center of it all stood Marcus Chen, no longer dressed in maintenance coveralls, but wearing the practical dark clothing that Vash Keithran had provided from his personal supplies. The young human was coordinating rescue operations from the station's primary command center, his voice carrying clearly through the communication channels as he directed teams to the locations where liberated prisoners were being held for medical evaluation. "Rescue Team 7, we have 37 former combat drones on level 12 who need immediate psychological support," Marcus said into his headset microphone. "Most of them have been separated from their original personalities for over 8 months, so approach slowly and identify yourselves clearly before making contact." Admiral Thrace Velter, the Zorathi officer commanding the Council fleet, materialized on the station via emergency transport with a full diplomatic escort. She was a veteran of 40 years of military service, her crystalline exoskeleton bearing the scars of dozens of engagements against pirate fleets and rogue states. But as she looked around the command center and tried to process what she was seeing, Admiral Velter found herself in completely unfamiliar territory. "Maintenance worker Chen," she said, her voice carrying the formal tone that Zorathi used when addressing beings of uncertain status. "I am Admiral Velter of the Council Defense Fleet. Can you provide a tactical summary of the current situation?" Marcus looked up from the coordination display he had been monitoring, and Admiral Velter was struck by the change in his demeanor. 3 hours ago, this human had been a minor station employee whose highest responsibility involved atmospheric recycling systems. Now he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had been tested by fire and emerged stronger. "Admiral," Marcus said, standing and offering the respectful nod that humans used as a greeting. "The Reaper attack has been neutralized. We have 43 liberated prisoners receiving medical attention and another 67 who are assisting with station repairs. The Reaper fleet has been disabled using a combination of electromagnetic pulse weapons and targeted system infiltration." Admiral Velter's primary eyes widened while her secondary optical organs focused on the displays around the command center. Electromagnetic pulse weapons? Our intelligence reports indicated that the station possessed only standard defensive systems. We improvised, Marcus replied with what might have been a slight smile. It turns out that atmospheric processors can be overloaded to generate localized EMP bursts if you know how to modify their crystalline resonance patterns. We used the station's own life support systems as weapons. Impossible, said Commander Sith Kaller, Admiral Velter's tactical advisor. The Keltharian officer was studying the damage reports with obvious confusion. Atmospheric processors are not designed for military applications. The energy requirements alone would destabilize the entire station's power grid. Under normal circumstances, yes, Marcus agreed. But if you coordinate the overloads with specific fluctuations in the artificial gravity systems, you can create a cascade effect that actually stabilizes the power distribution while amplifying the electromagnetic output. He gestured to one of the technical displays. We managed to disable the entire Reaper fleet without causing any permanent damage to the station's infrastructure. Admiral Velter found herself staring at the young human with a mixture of amazement and growing respect. You developed this technique during the attack, without access to military tactical databases or advanced simulation systems. I had help, Marcus said, and he turned toward the shadows near the command center's secondary entrance. Vash provided tactical guidance while I handled the technical implementation. Vash Kithrin emerged from the shadows like a materialized nightmare, his presence filling the command center with an almost electrical tension. Admiral Velter and her escort officers immediately adopted defensive postures, their hands moving toward weapons that they didn't dare draw in the presence of the galaxy's most feared hunter. Admiral, Vash said, his voice carrying the same dangerous harmonics that had intimidated countless beings throughout his long career. I trust you found the situation more manageable than you expected. Hunter Vash, Admiral Velter replied, her military training overriding her natural fear of the ancient predator. Your presence here was not reported in the emergency communications we received. I was observing the council session when the attack began, Vash explained, moving to stand beside Marcus at the coordination station. What followed was an education in human tactical thinking that I found quite illuminating. Admiral Velter noticed the way Vash positioned himself, not as Marcus's superior or commander, but as his equal partner in whatever operation they had conducted. This was unprecedented. Vash Kithrin was known for working alone, for treating other beings as either prey or obstacles to be eliminated. The idea that he would accept a partnership with anyone, much less a human maintenance worker, challenged everything the Admiral thought she knew about the legendary hunter. Perhaps you could explain how a maintenance worker and a freelance hunter managed to defeat an entire Reaper attack fleet, Commander Kaller asked, his voice carrying barely concealed skepticism. Marcus and Vash exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation in the space of a heartbeat. Then Marcus began describing the battle in detail, explaining his strategy of using the station's environmental systems as weapons, while Vash provided tactical expertise and direct combat support. As he spoke, Admiral Velter found herself revising her understanding of both the human species and the nature of effective military cooperation. The key insight, Marcus concluded, was recognizing that the Reapers were fighting a conventional war against an unconventional opponent. They expected us to respond according to established military doctrine, using standard weapons and predictable tactics. Instead, we transformed the environment itself into a weapon system. Ingenious, Admiral Velter admitted. But this raises larger questions about Reaper capabilities and objectives. If they possessed the intelligence necessary to plan such a sophisticated attack, why did they not anticipate unconventional defensive measures? Vash's tattoos pulsed with a darker light. Because they have been fighting the same war for too long against opponents who think in the same patterns, the Reapers have become as predictable as the targets they hunt. He paused, his ancient eyes focusing on something beyond the command center's walls. But there is something else, something that Marcus discovered during our engagement with their combat drones. Marcus activated a medical display that showed detailed scans of the liberated prisoners. The combat drones weren't volunteers or even willing converts. They were captured beings who had been subjected to forced cybernetic enhancement that stripped away their free will while leaving their consciousness intact. The implications hit Admiral Velter like a physical blow. They were prisoners of war. Worse than that, Marcus continued, his voice growing harder. They were torture victims. The Reapers have been systematically capturing beings from across the galaxy and transforming them into weapons while keeping their original personalities trapped inside their own minds. Every combat drone we face is also a victim who deserves rescue. Commander Caller's scales rippled with what Admiral Velter recognized as barely controlled rage. This changes everything. If the Reapers are using enslaved prisoners as soldiers, then our entire approach to combating them has been based on false assumptions. Indeed, Vash said quietly, which raises the question of what we do with this knowledge. Admiral Velter looked around the command center, nodding the way that station personnel and liberated prisoners were working together without apparent concern for species differences or prior loyalties. The human had somehow created an environment where former enemies could become allies in the span of a few hours. We share it with the entire galaxy, she said firmly. Every species, every government, every military organization needs to understand that the Reapers are not just raiders or terrorists. They are slavers operating on an unprecedented scale. Marcus nodded approvingly. And we need to develop new tactics that prioritize liberation over destruction. Every Reaper force we encounter includes beings who can be saved if we approach them correctly. You speak as if you intend to continue this work, Admiral Velter observed. I do, Marcus replied without hesitation. The Reapers have been operating for decades, which means there are thousands of enslaved beings out there who deserve freedom. Someone needs to develop the techniques and technologies necessary to liberate them safely. Vash turned to look at the young human with an expression that Admiral Velter had never seen on the hunter's face before. And you believe you are qualified for such work? Marcus met Vash's predatory gaze with steady eyes. I believe that humans bring a different perspective to problems like this. We don't accept that some sacrifices are necessary if there's any possibility of saving everyone, and we don't give up on people just because rescuing them is difficult or dangerous. Even when those people were trying to kill you moments before. Especially then, Marcus said firmly, because that's what separates us from the Reapers. They see beings as tools to be used or obstacles to be eliminated. We see them as people who deserve the chance to make their own choices. Admiral Velter realized that she was witnessing something historic. The moment when humanity's unique perspective on galactic conflicts became clear to the rest of the galaxy. For too long, the Council had operated under the assumption that military effectiveness was measured primarily by the ability to eliminate threats efficiently. But Marcus Chen had demonstrated that there was another way to think about warfare, one that prioritized redemption over destruction and transformation over elimination. The Council will need to debate these implications, Admiral Velter said carefully. The techniques you've developed could revolutionize our approach to the Reaper threat, but implementing them on a galactic scale will require unprecedented cooperation between multiple military organizations. Then we'd better get started, Marcus replied. He called up a new display that showed star charts covering 3 sectors of space. Based on the intelligence we extracted from the Reaper ships, they have major staging areas in at least 12 different systems. Each one likely contains hundreds or thousands of enslaved beings who are being prepared for conversion into combat drones. Vash studied the star charts with professional interest. You are proposing a series of liberation raids rather than conventional military strikes. I'm proposing that we stop treating this like a war and start treating it like a rescue operation, Marcus corrected. The Reapers are criminals, not soldiers. The beings they've enslaved are victims, not enemies. If we approach the situation correctly, we can turn their greatest weapon into our greatest advantage. Admiral Velter found herself nodding slowly as the strategic implications became clear. Convert their own forces to our cause by liberating them from cybernetic conditioning. Exactly, and once we've freed enough of them, they become our best source of intelligence about Reaper operations and capabilities. Marcus highlighted several systems on the star chart. Some of the liberated prisoners have already provided information about Reaper strongholds that aren't in any of our intelligence databases. This is madness, Commander Caller said, though his tone suggested he was beginning to see the logic in Marcus's proposal. You're talking about conducting military operations with the primary objective of saving enemy combatants rather than eliminating them. I'm talking about conducting rescue operations with the secondary objective of eliminating a criminal organization, Marcus replied. The difference in perspective matters because it changes everything about how we approach tactical planning. Vash's smile returned, sharper than before but somehow warmer as well. And this is why your species will reshape the galaxy, Marcus Chen. You refuse to accept the limitations that others consider inevitable. Admiral Velter stepped forward, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. The Council will need to authorize any large-scale operations, but I can provide limited fleet support for a demonstration mission. If you can prove that your liberation techniques work on a larger scale, it will provide the evidence necessary to convince the other species that this approach is viable. What did you have in mind? Marcus asked. Admiral Velter highlighted one of the systems on Marcus's star chart. The Kepler outpost. Our intelligence indicates that it's a minor Reaper staging area with approximately 50 enslaved combatants and limited defensive capabilities. If you can liberate the facility using your techniques, it will provide a proof of concept that the Council can evaluate. Marcus studied the tactical data, his mind already working through the challenges and opportunities that such an operation would present. We'll need specialized equipment for safely disrupting cybernetic implants, medical facilities for treating liberated prisoners, and a ship capable of generating the kind of electromagnetic pulses we used here. I can provide the ship, Vash said quietly. The Shadowhawk has been modified extensively for operations that require both stealth and overwhelming firepower. Her systems can be reconfigured to generate the electromagnetic effects you require. Admiral Velter felt a chill run down her exoskeleton as she realized what the ancient hunter was proposing. You're offering to partner with Marcus on this operation. I'm offering to learn from him, Vash corrected, his ancient eyes focusing on the young human with unmistakable respect. In 3 hours, this maintenance worker taught me more about the nature of true strength than I had learned in 2,000 years of hunting. The hunter's tattoos pulsed with brilliant light as he turned to face Marcus directly. I have spent my life believing that the ultimate expression of power was the ability to eliminate any threat without mercy or hesitation. But you showed me something greater. What's that? Marcus asked. The strength to save those who cannot save themselves, even when they are trying to kill you. The wisdom to see past what beings have been forced to become and recognize what they might choose to be if given the opportunity. And the courage to fight for a future where victory is measured not by enemies destroyed, but by lives redeemed. Vash extended his hand toward Marcus in a gesture that Admiral Velter recognized as the ancient human custom of partnership. You have earned something that no being in this galaxy has ever possessed, Marcus Chen. What's that? Vash's smile became something that transcended species boundaries, becoming an expression of genuine warmth and familial affection. You have earned the right to call me brother. Marcus clasped Vash's hand, and Admiral Velter felt the historical significance of the moment settle around them like gravity. The galaxy's deadliest hunter, a being who had never shown mercy to any opponent, never accepted partnership with any ally, and never acknowledged equality with any other consciousness, had just claimed a human maintenance worker as family. Brother, Marcus repeated, and the words seemed to carry the weight of a new future being born. The liberation of Kepler Outpost took place 3 weeks later, and it exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus's techniques for safely disrupting cybernetic implants proved effective on a large scale, while Vash's tactical expertise ensured that the operation proceeded without a single casualty among either the liberation forces or the freed prisoners. The 47 beings rescued from the facility provided intelligence that led to the discovery of 6 additional Reaper strongholds, each of which was subsequently liberated using the same methods. Within 6 months, the liberation campaign had freed over 3,000 enslaved beings and effectively crippled the Reaper organization's ability to conduct large-scale operations. More importantly, the campaign had demonstrated to the entire galaxy that humanity's unique perspective on conflict resolution could achieve results that purely military approaches could not. The Galactic Council's vote on human full membership took place exactly 1 year after the attack on Nexus Prime. The debate lasted for 17 hours and covered every aspect of human contributions to galactic civilization. In the end, The decision was unanimous. Ambassador Sithais Keth Maller, speaking for the Keltharian Empire, cast his vote with words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. We have learned that strength is not measured by the ability to destroy one's enemies, but by the wisdom to transform them into friends. Humanity has taught us that the greatest victory is not the elimination of opposition, but the expansion of understanding. They have earned not just our respect, but our gratitude. Marcus Chen received the news while aboard the Shadowhawk, en route to another liberation operation in the Outer Rim territories. He and Vash had been working together for months, developing new techniques for rescuing enslaved beings and transforming former Reaper strongholds into rehabilitation centers where liberated prisoners could rebuild their lives. "Congratulations, brother," Vash said as they stood on the ship's observation deck, watching the star's wheels slowly past the transparent aluminum windows. "Your species has achieved full membership in the galactic community." Marcus smiled as he read the official communication from the Council, but his attention was already focused on their next mission. "It's nice to have the recognition, but the real work is just beginning. We've barely scratched the surface of what the Reapers accomplished during their decades of operation." "Indeed," Vash agreed, his tattoos pulsing with the steady rhythm that Marcus had learned indicated deep contemplation. "But we have also proven that their methods are not irreversible. Every being they enslaved can be freed, every consciousness they trapped can be restored." Marcus nodded, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed distant and cold, but filled with possibility and hope. "You know what I find most remarkable about all this?" "What?" 6 months ago, I was just a maintenance worker who spent his days fixing atmospheric processors. The idea that I might have something valuable to contribute to galactic civilization would have seemed absurd. Marcus turned to look at his partner, this ancient being who had become closer than any biological sibling could have been. But it turned out that fixing things was exactly the skill the galaxy needed most. Vash's smile was warm and genuine. "You did not just fix atmospheric processors, Marcus Chen. You saw beings who had been broken by cruelty and torture, and you refused to accept that they could not be repaired. That perspective, the unwillingness to abandon anyone who could be saved, that is humanity's true gift to the galaxy." The communication console chimed with an incoming message, and Marcus activated the display to reveal Admiral Velter's crystalline features. The Zorathi officer looked tired but pleased as she delivered her report. "Marcus, Vash, I have news from the Council session. Based on the success of your liberation campaigns, the Council has approved the formation of a new organization dedicated to rescuing enslaved beings throughout the galaxy. They're calling it the Liberation Corps, and they want you to serve as its first director of operations." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with overwhelming responsibility. That's incredible, Admiral, but I don't have any formal training in large-scale military operations." "You have something better than training," Admiral Velter replied. "You have results. In 6 months, your methods have accomplished what conventional military force failed to achieve in 20 years. The Council recognizes that this work requires a fundamentally different approach, and you've proven that you understand that approach better than anyone." Vash placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, and the young human could feel the ancient predator's approval radiating through the simple contact. "Accept the position, brother. The galaxy needs what you can provide, and you have earned the right to shape how this work is conducted." Marcus looked around the Shadowhawk's observation deck, thinking about all the beings they had rescued and all those who still remained in captivity throughout the galaxy. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to create something genuinely new, an organization that measured success not by enemies defeated, but by lives restored. "I accept," Marcus said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "But I have conditions." Admiral Velter's secondary optical organs focused with interest. "What conditions?" "First, the Liberation Corps operates according to human principles of warfare. We prioritize rescue over destruction, redemption over elimination, and transformation over conquest. Second, every liberated being has the opportunity to join our operations if they choose. We become stronger by including those we save rather than treating them as burdens to be relocated. And third, Vash Keithran serves as my co-director with equal authority and responsibility." Vash turned to stare at Marcus with surprise and something that might have been profound gratitude. "You would share such authority with me?" After everything my people did to the galaxy before we disappeared. You're not your people, Marcus replied firmly. You're my brother, my partner, and the being who taught me that strength means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Admiral Velter's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was a Zorathi expression of amusement. I believe the Council will find your conditions acceptable. In fact, I suspect they've been hoping you would insist on such an arrangement. The communication ended, leaving Marcus and Vash alone on the observation deck as the Shadowhawk continued its journey toward their next mission. For a long moment, they simply stood together in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of the future they were helping to create. Do you ever regret it? Marcus asked finally, giving up your solitary existence to work with others. Vash considered the question with the gravity it deserved. For 2,000 years, I believed that the ultimate expression of strength was the ability to stand alone against any threat. I took pride in needing no one, trusting no one, and depending on nothing but my own skills and determination. The ancient hunter's tattoos began to glow more brightly. But you taught me that there is a strength greater than individual capability, the strength that comes from choosing to bind your fate to others, from making their welfare more important than your own survival. Marcus felt that familiar warmth spreading through his chest, the same feeling he had experienced when he first chose to stay behind and face the combat drones rather than flee to safety. Is that what humans call family? Among other names, Vash replied. But whatever term you use, the reality remains the same. We are bound together by choice rather than biology, by shared purpose rather than genetic heritage. The hunter's smile became something that transcended species boundaries. In the old draconic tongue, there is a word, Velterok. It means chosen brother, one who becomes family through trials shared and trust earned rather than through accident of birth. Velterok, Marcus repeated, testing the weight of the alien syllables. I like the sound of that. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from the ship's navigation system. They had reached their destination, a remote system where Reaper intelligence indicated the presence of a major processing facility where captured beings were being converted into combat drones. The facility was larger and more heavily defended than any they had previously encountered, with an estimated population of over 500 enslaved beings. Ready for another challenge, Velterok? Vash asked as they made their way to the ship's command center. Marcus checked his equipment and reviewed the tactical plans they had developed during the journey. The rescue operation would be their most complex yet, requiring precise coordination between electromagnetic pulse attacks, surgical strikes against cybernetic control systems, and immediate medical intervention for hundreds of liberated prisoners. It would test every technique they had developed and push their capabilities to the absolute limit. Ready? Marcus replied, and he realized that he truly was. 6 months ago, the idea of leading a military operation would have terrified him. Now, surrounded by the tools and knowledge he had accumulated, supported by a partner whose skills complemented his own perfectly, and driven by the knowledge that hundreds of beings were counting on their success, Marcus felt the calm certainty that came from knowing exactly what he was meant to do with his life. The Liberation Corps' first major operation began 3 hours later, and it would be remembered throughout galactic history as the moment when humanity's approach to conflict resolution was proven on the largest possible scale. By the time the operation concluded, 537 beings had been freed from cybernetic enslavement. The Reaper facility had been converted into a rehabilitation center, and the galaxy had gained a new understanding of what became possible when compassion was combined with determination. But perhaps most importantly, the operation demonstrated that the bond between Marcus Chen and Vash Keithran, a human maintenance worker and the galaxy's deadliest hunter, represented something entirely new in galactic civilization. They had become living proof that the strongest partnerships were formed not by similarity, but by complementary differences, not by convenience, but by shared commitment to principles larger than individual survival. As their ship departed the liberated system, carrying its cargo of rescued beings toward rehabilitation facilities where they could begin rebuilding their lives, Marcus stood once again on the observation deck and looked out at the stars. But now he saw them differently, not as distant points of light in an indifferent universe, but as destinations where other beings waited for rescue, where other wrongs could be set right, where other families could be reunited. The galaxy had mocked the young Terran who spent his days crawling through maintenance tunnels and fixing atmospheric processors. They had dismissed him as primitive, irrelevant, and unworthy of serious consideration. They had been wrong about everything. Marcus Chen had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their intellect, but their refusal to abandon anyone who could be saved. He had demonstrated that the most powerful weapons were not those that destroyed enemies, but those that transformed them into friends. And he had shown that the truest victory was not the elimination of opposition, but the expansion of family to include beings who had once been strangers. The galaxy's deadliest hunter had recognized these truths and claimed Marcus as brother. In doing so, Vash Kithrin had acknowledged something that would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. That strength measured by the willingness to protect others would always triumph over strength measured by the ability to destroy them. Together, they represented the future, a future where the phrase, "they mocked the young Terran," would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy learned what humanity was truly capable of accomplishing, when they refused to accept the impossible as inevitable. The stars waited, filled with beings who needed rescue, worlds that required healing, and conflicts that demanded resolution. Marcus Chen and Vash Kithrin, Veltarok united by choice and purpose, sailed toward those challenges with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing that no problem is too complex to solve when you refuse to give up on anyone who deserves saving. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly as it should be.